Technology and integration. So the first slide here talks about guidelines and principles on how information will be exchanged between backend systems and with external systems. This is especially important, and we've seen that across utilities as well, where implementing future smart grid business processes involves interaction with backend systems and with external systems. For example, the smart energy portal provider or your installer, as the case might be. And all of these applications and systems tend to be disparate nature in terms of their application platforms. Some might be in mainframe systems, others might be in .NET, Java, just to name a few. So it's very important to make sure that you understand what the business processes are that we're trying to realize here. How will the data flows across systems work to realize those business processes, and ensure that you have clear guidelines and principles that the team is following in making the day-to-day decisions of those data exchanges, whether it be sending information via services, whether it be non-real-time, asynchronous type interactions, or if it is large volume, flat file type interactions across multiple systems. It's also important to understand what your strategy would be on the reusable services that you create as part of this project, and how you plan to use open standards and industry standards across the board for the work that you're doing. And what does each industry standard mean for your particular implementation, and how do you customize it for your requirements? So all of these activities are essential, and doing them on the fly while you're actually doing technical design for the implementation can be a very time-consuming and expensive task. It can also increase the risk of the project because you're discovering while you're implementing. So having the foresight to actually implement that up front, figuring out what these guidelines are, to take decisions, for example, thinking of completed field orders from the installer with the MDM, customer care system and asset management system in our case. That interaction was a complex one. We thought about it up front. We knew about format that was coming in from the installer and the different systems that needed it, and the timing of that requirement as well. So we took into account the information being exchanged, we took into account the reusability of that information, and we created a integration architecture using the appropriate tools based on those business requirements. Similarly, setting up the location information on the head end and using the meter discovery event on the head end to configure the MDM with the channels expected for a particular meter. So things like that, decisions were taken up front on what integration platform we'll use, what is the requirement in terms of real-time, near real-time, or batch type interface, and move forward from there. We also established an enterprise team responsible for identification and management of such reusable services, and they were also responsible for establishing the common standards that we just spoke about before. And some of the principles, just to give an idea about the kind of principles we came up with, some of the principles that we thought about were things like keeping your business logic within the applications and using your integration and ETL tools based on their sweet spots, driving all data flows based on business requirements versus technical requirements only. So those are the kind of principles we came up with. The second point is around test early and often, and this is often overlooked when you start a smart metering, smart grid project, but it's a very important point because of the fact that given the evolving nature of the space and the fact that most of the vendors tend to be companies that are new to this themselves, they're learning from their different implementations across North America and across the world and trying to incorporate their learnings into their products as they go along. What that does is that it creates an environment of flux, and on a large program like a smart metering deployment where you need a certain release to finish before you start the next release and you have defined scopes across each release, you don't want to have a scope bleed across releases or miss your timelines just because a particular release from the vendor of a particular software wasn't available. So understand what is available today, conduct proof of concepts to confirm the data flows and the integrations that are listed in the documentation. If the documentation is not available, ensure that you have vendor participation during your joint application design sessions, during your technical design sessions, and work with them to do proof of concepts across all those critical process flows so that A, your team understands what to expect, and B, the vendor also has a better appreciation of what you're trying to do. And from that point onwards, proactively provide you the information on gaps you may have identified. We did that with most of our interfaces with the head-end system. We also did it with some of our interfaces with the MDM system, and that really helped jumpstart the overall effort and kept the issues which are normally seen during string testing out of that phase. The third point is around aiming to reduce time between when data is recorded in the field and when it is made available to customer-facing portals. This is also becoming key as customers realize the benefits of smart metering and smart grid, and the fact that most utilities tend to tie the benefits realized by this project to the conservation that customers will do once they are provided more information. So the aim over here is that more recent information on the portal leads to short feedback loop with the customers and encourages fine-tuning of their conservation behavior. And so the best practice is to architect to provide detailed energy usage multiple times a day to the portal, build analysis and build usage on a daily basis, and depending on your business situation, rates on a weekly basis. By doing so, customers are finding real-time information available to them to be able to change their patterns, and this helps BGE's business case as well. Do you want to take the next one, Jessica?
Sure, and I might just offer that we're also conducting a couple of additional proofs of concept during the field trial. So discovery along the way as we're testing and as we're designing, we discovered things that we want to be able to test in the field that we didn't include in the pilot, or the new technologies from a vendor or something like that. So one example is what's been referred to as a mobile AP, or a mobile access point from SSN. So if you have isolated meters where the mesh is not built out and you want to be able to collect billing data, could you use a mobile version of the access point to collect that data and get it back to the head end? Another one is probably for us is using SSN software on a handheld device for field crews. So there are just a couple of examples of where, as a project manager, you'd want to build in time for things like that and be flexible so that as the technology evolves, new products are available, you can use them in things like proofs of concept, in a field trial or pre-deployment or during your ramp-up stage. The last point around business processes, I think we didn't have a separate category on business processes, and it's just a tiny bullet, but it's a huge point. Most utilities have done it well, and we tried to learn from them, but it's a massive effort to engage all of the stakeholders across the utility that should have input into the requirements before you even start to technically design or build anything. So I think for us, the better part of the first year was really around engagement of the different stakeholder groups across our company and getting those requirements from them in really clear, concise words that we could then take and start to design to. Over time, those business processes and those requirements turned into functional designs, technical designs, and maybe one of the innovative things that we did, I think, at BGE, our process and test team came up with this concept of conference room pilots, where they collected key stakeholders from the more complex business processes where there are multiple touch points and handoffs, and they pulled them all into a conference room and pretended to be in a live situation and go through those handoffs to see if there were missed requirements, if we missed exceptions. And in fact, we did. We learned a lot from our own testing, our own conference room pilots, and we went back and updated our documents and baked those new efforts into our plans. So it was a nice add by the team. And maybe the final point I'll make is just that after you've gone through that huge effort to get the higher level requirements and you're in functional design and technical design, and we're down now to analyzing the exceptions, which is part of that little bullet, but there's 72 for us exceptions, right? So you have these standard processes that will handle the majority of the work effort, and then there are exceptions that inevitably occur, and we didn't want to be behind the 8 ball when those exceptions occur and start to pile up during mass deployment. So it was really important for us now to go through that process and make sure that ownership of each one of those is defined and that those organizations are staffed appropriately to handle them. So business process design was a big effort for us.
Abdul asks about what standards you used to integrate the meter data management system with CIS billing and outage management. And Yogesh asks how often you were sending data to the MDMS.
Okay, so the answer to the first question is our standards were primarily driven by common business objects that are specific to the BGE implementation of Smart Grid. We are using customer care and billing from Oracle as our customer care system, and MDM again from Oracle as our meter data management system. And these systems interact using something called Oracle AIA architecture, which is out-of-the-box functionality for most of the bread and butter integrations between these two systems. So we leveraged that, and for anything custom that we created, we had a format that we developed specifically for BGE and used that across the board. That format was based on industry best practices. I'm sorry, could you please repeat the second question, Jesse?
How frequently was data sent to the MDMS?
That depends on your business requirements. For the point on sending data to the portal, we're sending information at this point once a day from the headend over to the MDM, but the goal is to be able to send it 4 times a day, which is the frequency we actually read meters data from the meters to the headend. So we are at this point conducting tests and performance evaluations for MDM to be able to do that, and that would allow us to be able to send data to the customer-facing portals 4 times a day as well. So while that goal, we're trying to evaluate the implications of that goal on our technical architecture and try to move towards that area.
Great, thank you.
Just a quick point on Jessica's last point on business processes. One of the challenges that we've seen in smart metering and smart grid implementations is that requirements tend to be discovered and evolve over time given the newness of the space, and the appreciation by business owners of the to-be processes, the future state processes, it is not there completely when you start the project, but by the time we get into the details of it, that's when a lot of discovery is made. And that leads to new requirements, and as you can imagine, development and design may have already started by that time, and that can potentially cause churn while your project is going on, and therefore impact the releases and so on and so forth. In order to address that situation, one of the unique things we did that Jessica pointed to earlier also was the conference room pilots, where not only the things that that we just discussed, but also the fact that we educated the business users on what the possibilities are with the new infrastructure that they would be getting, what the functionality is now, what will the impact be on their current state processes with the implementation of that technology. Also brought in industry best practices and information on how other utilities are doing it to give them a comprehensive picture of what's available, what can it do, what are the people doing with it, so that they could accurately assess impacts on what they know from an application and a business process perspective.